On the other end of that, how far do you think agency can go from a planning perspective? So I ask this because people insist on sort of meta planning perspectives where does the ability that we can plan afford at least the principal possibility that you can step out of the process that you're embedded in and kind of rise above it. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a poetic question.
Well, no, no. I think it's exactly where this conversation should go next. And I'm just putting it, framing it in this narrative of where does one draw the bright lines between different kinds of things. I like calling them natural kinds, but I've been told off by philosophers that's a bit too, so I call them particular kinds. And I think that that metacognitive aspect that you're speaking to, that standing back and looking at yourself, sense making and planning. I think this is the characteristic of these now much deeper generative models that have very deep or high hierarchical structures that can actually see what's going on below. And as soon as you do that, I think you now have the opportunity to be aware of things, and you could possibly even argue self-aware. So I think that that's the bright line. The very thing that you've brought to the table by that question is structurally the bright line that distinguishes systems that have either a minimal self-awareness or a minimal selfhood anyway. And if they are aware of that, or they can model or infer that minimal selfhood, then possibly full-blown self-awareness. So I think that's a really important aspect. I would see it just in terms of the hierarchical depth of a generative model. And in a slightly deflationary way, I would see this very much through the eyes of people like, James Lang theory of emotions, or possibly Tony Damasio's formulation of valence states of being and emotional states of being. In the following very simple sense that if I've got the capacity or the structure of a generative model that includes a hypothesis or a belief or a representation that I am something and that I can be in different states, that then enables me to contextualize or condition all my belief updating and my selection of plans in a much more fine-grained and functional way than if I didn't have that capacity to recognize I am in this state. So very simply, for example, if I am faced with a myriad of sensations from my body, interoceptive sensations of a racing heart, hyperventilation, extra visually, it's very dark. I can't see what's around the corner. I can't see what's in front of me. All of these, this sort of profile, this particular pattern of sensory evidence, sensory impressions, is evidence that I'm frightened. Now, if I'm frightened, I can now say I am the sort of creature that is frightened. And when I am frightened, I expect my body to do these kinds of things. So flight and fright responses, which means that I will now send down predictions that my heart should beat faster and I should breathe. More quickly if I'm just about to run away, or conversely, if I just want to attend or freeze if I don't want to be noticed. But the point being that you are now self-constructing the very signals through your body that are providing evidence that you're in fear, and you can get into a little vicious cycle, which usually is quite functional if you are actually alone in a dark alley and you're frightened. It's probably good that you maintain a degree of fear until you secure evidence that you don't need to be frightened anymore. And part of that evidence, oh, my heart's slowing down now. Oh, it was just a panic attack, or it's hyperventilation. So all of that very simple story, which would justify the existence of certain creatures with generative models that have this very sophisticated, very deep representations of self in different valenced or emotional states, I think is exactly the kind of generative model that you would require to at least have a minimal selfhood. And then you can imagine being on top of that, seeing that, oh, yes, it looks as if I'm inferring that I am frightened. Therefore, I must be frightened. And I can tell myself I'm frightened. And then I can tell you I'm frightened. And then you have self awareness.
Then, of course, there's this question of how far does that go? Like, is there an upper bound on how metacognitive you can become?
Yeah. I think that's a secret of philosophy and the philosophy of consciousness. So, as a younger man, excuse me, I used to think that clearly there is. And there's actually a mathematical bound as well as a sort of common sense physical bound in the size of your brain. You know, the best model of the world, of course, is or map of the world is the world itself. The best map is the territory, and of course you can't physically realize this, which is another argument against the radical inactivism. But mathematically, there is also a stronger, more mathematically motivated bound, and that's the inherits from an alternative carving up or decomposition of the log evidence, not into, in this instance, energy and entropy, but just by switching a couple of terms round, it now emerges in a functional form that a statistician would recognize as accuracy and complexity. So what that means is, as you're doing your self-evidencing, it looks as if, or implicitly, you are generating very accurate predictions of your world as simply as possible because you're minimizing the complexity, a bit like Occam's razor. So just by being self-evidencing, and if you recall from the point of view of the free energy principle, just being means you have to self-evidence, or at least it looks as if you are self-evidencing. That means you're trying to find the simplest explanation for all of your sensations, which means that you can be too hierarchically deep. You can have, if you're in machine learning, this would be a little bit like having an overly expressive, over-parameterized deep network or convolutional neural network or variation autoencoder. And that over-parameterization leads to overfitting, which leads to a failure to generalize. And these are all symptoms of not minimizing the complexity and just focusing on the accuracy of the maximum likelihood part of the equation, as opposed to the maximum marginal likelihood, which is the model evidence or the self-evidencing part. So when you say, is there any upper bound on the level of meta-ness in terms of self-modeling? Yes, I think there is. At some point, you will start to incur a complexity cost because there are too many degrees of freedom that your generative model that's meant to provide the best explanations for all your sensations will hit, and after which you will become more complex, and your path integral of your free energy or your surprisal will start to fall, and literally you will have smaller adaptive fitness. You just won't work in this world. You'll overfit everything. You'll overthink. And I have friends in Portugal who've written about this. And certain psychopathologies can actually be a reflection of overthinking, over mentalizing, and having too many hierarchical levels. And I think the best expression with tongue in cheek of this pathology is a philosopher, and particularly a philosopher of consciousness. So they spend their entire lives worrying about experience and qualitative experience and nature of consciousness. So they're really overfitting their lived world and having a lovely time indulging in their epistemic affordances, but there will probably be no answer. So I've always thought that this argument was not only explains consciousness, but also explains the existence of philosophers, or why there are so few of them, or good ones anyway. So from that point of view, I think there is a really fundamental upper bound. I should say that view, in my eyes, has been vindicated by recent moves in philosophy. This is not my field, so this is just hearsay from my friends in philosophy. So people like David Chalmers and Andy Clark have been in exchange on what has now become the new focus, which is the next hierarchical level up, which is the meta problem. So this is not the hard problem. This is the meta problem. Why do we find the hard problem so puzzling? So this is wonderfully metacognitive, and that's now the new question. And I think that this this story that I just told you, I think has something to say about the meta problem. You know, as Andy Clark summarizes it, why is it that we are so puzzled by the by our qualitative experiences? Why do we spend our entire lives with existential angst, eluding any ontological security just by being philosophical about our own existence? And it, clearly from the point of view of our conversation, this is just an expression of responding to epistemic affordances in a highly encultured context of cultural niche construction, which is philosophy and communication. But from the point of view of the meta problem or the meta hard problem being answerable, I think that there is a beautiful answer that is engendered, or insight that's engendered just by asking that question, asking the meta hard question or the meta question, and that's the very fact that we are aware of our qualitative experiences is itself very revealing, and it speaks exactly to this high level that we were just talking about, which is a system making inferences, having hypotheses about its sense making, and the consequences that in terms of overt and covert action, the plans you commit to either by cardiac acceleration or covert action by attending to this or attending to that source of evidence. So that tells you that there are only certain creatures or systems that will ever be exposed or even ask the kind of questions that form the meta problem or the meta hard problem. And it's only those kinds of questions, it's only those kinds of systems that have this capacity to actually realize that they are something, and that they are something that is doing inference or belief updating in different contexts. So just knowing that, I think, provides a nice solution to the meta problem, at least, if not the hard problem in and of itself. So I find this fascinating. I repeat, it's not my area of expertise. You have to get David Chalmers on to see what he thinks about it in a moment.
Why do you think that is? Is it just a matter of historical contingency that there were these creatures that happened to have the right machinery, the right substrate that got them to that scale?
Yeah, again, that's a great question. I think there's a principled answer to that question. In effect, I've already given it. Remember that the only imperative for your generative model is that which maximizes the likelihood, the marginal likelihood of all your sensations. So now you ask yourself, why on earth would I have a generative model that included a sense of self and indeed a sense of self or self-awareness? Why? And I think the answer is very simple. It's just that we have to generate predictions of a universe in which there are other creatures who are doing the same thing. So as soon as you have a sense of self and other, then I have to have one to understand what you're doing, to make sense of you, all the sensations that you generate. And of course, as soon as you start talking, I'm now going to have a self-awareness in order to do the turn taking that's necessary for us to actually communicate. So I think it's just a reflection of something we were talking about before, that self-evidencing, active inference, predictive processing of this inactive and situated sort has always to be seen in context. And if the context is I'm doing this in a universe that's populated by things like me, then there's going to be a natural tendency for increasing sophistication, depth of sophistication, to disambiguate who's talking and to be able to talk in the first place. So what that says is that we wouldn't have these conversations and we wouldn't have these hierarchically, deeply and delicately crafted generative models crafted by this evolutionary level of model selection in the absence of our conspecifics and our brothers and sisters. It just wouldn't be there. So you're only going to find this level of or this depth of self-organization and sentient behavior in populations, basically. So that, I think that is a simple consequence and a simple answer to your question: why me? Why are we have these privileged, really high level things that we may only share with things like dolphins? I don't know. Um, uh, uh, I think it's just a reflection that we co-evolved, and the nature of that co-evolution. That itself is a free energy minimizing process means that there are lots of examples of me, and that we're all coupled through our action perception cycles.